and play on 2nd and 10. That's his youth right there.
Tagovailoa trying to make up for it. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown! Alabama wins!
So today I'll be giving my Week 11 college football rankings for the 2025 season and also reacting to the new college football playoff rankings. And there are a lot of problems with them. So I've still got Ohio State at number one. They just beat Purdue, who is a terrible team, but they did blow them out at 34 to 10, like you would expect them to do. And why I have Ohio State number one instead of the two other undefeated teams is because while Texas A&M's best win against Notre Dame appears to be as good or better than Ohio State's best win against Texas, Ohio State has been the most dominant team this season. No one except for Texas has come close at all with Ohio State, and Texas A&M does have a couple of close wins against bad teams, beating Auburn by only 6 and beating Arkansas by only 3. But I decided to move Texas A&M up to 2 and Indiana down to 3 because you could make the argument that Texas A&M's win over Notre Dame is as good as Indiana's win over Oregon, and Indiana's coming off a very close win against a terrible Penn State team, while Texas A&M is coming off a blowout win over not a great Missouri team, but a Missouri team that is much better than Penn State is. But the college football playoff rankings still have Indiana at 2 and Texas A&M at 3, which I do think is acceptable. So I've still got Alabama at 4 and uh, Georgia at 5 and Ole Miss at 6 because that's easy. Alabama beat Georgia and Georgia beat Ole Miss. Georgia did what they should do this past week, blowing out a terrible Mississippi State team 41 to 21, but they haven't always done that against these kind of teams this season. And Ole Miss, even though I'm a fan of theirs, I'm not going to praise them for blowing out the Citadel because the Citadel isn't even a good FCS team. But I have Texas Tech at 7 because even though I actually think that Texas Tech is a better team than Ole Miss is, Ole Miss has played a tougher schedule than Texas Tech has, and you could make the argument that the Ole Miss's best win over Oklahoma is just as good as Texas Tech's best win over BYU. But the CFP rankings have Texas Tech at 6 and Ole Miss at 7, which I think is completely acceptable. So I only moved BYU down to number 8 because even though they got blown out, the two other one-loss teams that I have behind them, Oregon and Georgia Tech, none of them have a big win. Oregon's best win came this past week against Iowa, who is a 3-loss team, and Georgia Tech's best win is against Wake Forest, which you could hardly call that a good win. And neither one of those wins are as good as BYU's win over Utah. Even though if Oregon and BYU play, I would pick Oregon, and if BYU and Georgia Tech played, I'd say that'd be about a toss-up. But the CFP rankings moved BYU down to 12. And I disagree with that. But they have 3 2-loss teams ahead of BYU, Notre Dame, Texas, and Oklahoma. And well, I think all 3 of those teams would beat BYU At this point in the season, I really think you have to go by a record and who they've played. And unless the two loss team has a win over that one loss team. And I feel the same way about the CFP having Georgia Tech only at 16. Because while I do think Notre Dame and Texas and Oklahoma would beat Georgia Tech too. Georgia Tech is a one-loss team, and they're all two-loss teams. And then the three other two-loss teams that are ahead of Georgia Tech, Utah, Vanderbilt, and Miami. If they were to play Georgia Tech, I think those would be toss-ups. But I've got Texas at 11 and Oklahoma at 12 and Vanderbilt at 13 because Texas beat Oklahoma and Vanderbilt and they're all two-loss teams. But I had Oklahoma ahead of Vanderbilt last week, so Oklahoma didn't play and Vanderbilt struggled to beat a terrible Auburn team. So there's really no reason for me to now move Vanderbilt ahead of Oklahoma. And that was a weird game between Auburn and Vanderbilt because of Auburn's offense had been struggling all season under Hugh Freeze, who is more of an offensive coach, and then fires him, and then now they find their offense, and they made DJ Durkin the defensive coordinator, interim head coach, and he's a great defensive coordinator. He's done a really good job with Auburn's defense. But then now that he becomes head coach, their defense falls apart. I've got Utah at 14, and the CFP has Vanderbilt and Utah flipped the other way around. Utah 13 and Vanderbilt 14, which I do think is acceptable. Because Vanderbilt does play in a tougher conference than Utah does, and neither one has what we consider to be a big win. Utah, though, has a couple of decent wins over Arizona State and Cincinnati. Vanderbilt only has one decent win coming against Missouri. Now, some of the reason why Auburn's defense struggled with Vanderbilt is probably just Vanderbilt has a good offense, but Auburn hadn't allowed more than 24 points all season long to anybody. So I'd say that was pretty good by the Vanderbilt offense. So I've got Virginia at 15, Louisville 16, Miami 17, Notre Dame 18, USC 19, and Michigan 20 because Virginia beat Louisville, Louisville beat Miami, Miami beat Notre Dame, Notre Dame beat USC, and USC beat Michigan, and they're all two-loss teams. Even though I actually think Virginia is the worst of 15 to 20. Virginia's loss, though, to Wake Forest it really isn't that embarrassing because Virginia isn't supposed to be anywhere near 8-2. And Wake Forest is a lot better this year than they've been in a while. Louisville, though, their loss to California is pretty embarrassing. And Miami, they played like they should this past week, blowing out Syracuse at 38 to 10. At Notre Dame, they just played at Navy, but they destroyed them 49 to 10, like you would expect them to. But actually, if Notre Dame and Miami were to play again, I would pick Notre Dame. And USC, I watched them play against Northwestern last Friday night. Their defense had a bad start, but ended up okay, holding them to 17 points. And their offense scored 38, so they played like you would expect them to. But this could have been a touchdown closer because Northwestern intercepted Jaden Mayava and was about to run it back for the pick six and then fumbled at the two. And then it goes into the end zone for a USC touchback. So that was one of the craziest plays that I've ever seen. But the CFP is being unfair when it comes to the ACC because it has Miami at 15 and Virginia at 19 and Louisville at 20. And while Miami has the best roster of those three teams, you have to respect Louisville's win over Miami and Virginia's win over Louisville, and the CFP rankings clearly don't. So I've got Houston at 21 and Cincinnati at 22 because, well, Houston played another bad team and struggled. This time it was against Central Florida. This time they did win 30 to 27. And that was enough for me to leave them ahead of Cincinnati because at least Houston has a win over Arizona State. Cincinnati, that no one they've beat has lost less than 4 games, but Cincinnati didn't play this past week. I don't think the CFP rankings are being fair when it comes to Houston because they have Cincinnati ranked 25, but then Houston is unranked. And I've got Pittsburgh at 20 at 3. They don't have any big wins yet, but the rest of their schedule is very tough. It's Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and Miami. So if Pittsburgh finishes 10 and 2, they're going to be a top 10 team most likely. But what's most likely to happen is they'll finish 7 and 5 or 8 and 4 and be unranked. So I've got Arizona State at 24 because they have the best win of all the three lost teams against Texas Tech. And I've got TCU at 25 because even though they're coming off a home loss to Iowa State, they beat SMU, who has the second best win of all the three lost teams over Miami. And the CFP has Iowa at 21 and Tennessee at 23. And I disagree with that because neither one of them has a good win, even though they both play in tougher conferences than Arizona State and TCU do. And the CFP has South Florida at 24. And well, I don't think any group of 5 teams should be ranked right now. If you're going to rank them, you at least need to do it fairly. And the CFP is not because Memphis and Tulane, like South Florida, have two losses, and Memphis beat South Florida, and Tulane beat Memphis, and Memphis and Tulane are both unranked. But that'll be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.